Today, I'm excited to have Michelle Stevens on the podcast. Michelle is the Chief Revenue Officer of Felt, which is touted as the ultimate care API. She was also a co-founder and the Chief Nursing Officer at Oathcare. She has also done a PhD from USCF, focusing on child stress and on autonomic nervous system reactivity. She also has an extensive background in pediatrics and nursing, and she's a board member at the Georgetown University School of Nursing. It was really great to have Michelle on the podcast because her background as a nurse, then a startup founder, is a little bit unique compared to typical people in tech who start off in tech and then end up making their way into healthcare. And to really get her perspective on the way that she got enamored with technology and combine that with experience and just her journey was very, very interesting, as well as getting some deep insights into some of the ways that healthcare is flawed and the way that she sees solutions for it. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hey, Michelle, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David, for having me. It's so good to be with you.
Yeah, super excited to talk about your experiences, starting from Felt and then getting into Act 17 Collective. But, we always start this podcast starting from the beginning and that inception point. So, you obviously have a lot of experience and initially were in nursing and pediatrics. So, a little bit different than the first questions because usually I get into entrepreneurship directly. But, what actually got you interested in those fields first?
I am so glad you asked because even though I am in tech, I am first and foremost a nurse. And nursing is actually what led me into building health tech. So I actually had a brother that passed away when I was 7. So a very pivotal time in my life. He passed away from a congenital heart defect. And that really led me to pursue a career in pediatrics. It was those nurses and doctors that cared for me and my family so deeply. I remember the nurse that helped me color the type of heart he had, like a normal heart, all red, and then his heart with red and blue blood mixing, and then pasting that heart on his incubator, and then being able to hold him. It was just that kind of impact that I want to make for the rest of the world. And so I went to undergrad nursing. Usually nursing now is like a second career or a sort of fast-tracked career for folks. And for me, it was always something I wanted to do. And I got to go to my dream school, Georgetown University, where actually now I'm on the board of nursing and get to support the amazing Dean Waite and her pursuits for the school. But the school really changed my life, I have to say. I met my husband there, who was in the School of Foreign Service, which being a nurse, you would know, like those two schools or paths never cross. And from there, I got to work at the #1 children's hospital in the world, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And this hospital was actually where the physician who created the repair for my brother's diagnosis was in residence. So I, as a pediatric intensive care unit nurse, got to take care of a lot of patients like my brother. So I say all of this because it was such a full circle experience for me to be able to really start my career where it all started. And so I would get on the phone at night with my mom sometimes and just cry around the patients that I would care for, and the impact I was making. It was really beautiful. I realized there in the intensive care unit that stress is a formidable factor in health, for better and for worse, right? My goodness, the stress of working in the ICU really brought me to a whole new level of nursing and appreciation, but also I saw the way that it just absolutely crushed children and parents. I remember having to grab a parent off of a window ledge who was about to jump. And so, it was intense to say the least. And I really got fascinated also with my own early childhood stress experiences and came to understand the phenomenon of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So I don't know if you're familiar. Yes. Okay. Well, this is actually something that doesn't get spoken about enough. So I'm happy to share. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have a dose response correlation to 7 out of the top 10 chronic illnesses we face today in the United States. So that is to
Wow.
say, for every additional ACE, there is hundreds of percents more likelihood of gaining a chronic illness that's affecting us at large scale today. Diabetes, heart disease, uh, asthma, all of these are very pivotal to our health and wellness and have their origins in childhood stress. And so I was like, oh, I want to get after that for the rest of my life and be able to prevent that. And so I actually moved on, got my advanced nursing degree at Hopkins as a pediatric nurse practitioner, and decided to work in primary care because I wanted to prevent those tertiary care experiences I was seeing in the ICU. And when I got to a DC metropolitan practice that was super busy, multicultural and ethnic, it was really where I had my first up close and personal experience with the healthcare system and all of its failures, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was me now working at the top of my scope of practice, being able to treat and diagnose, and I felt like my hands were tied behind my back. I felt like I was saying black box this, contraindication that, half the dose this for kids, not having enough research to base and back my interventions for these moms and children, and it was heartbreaking for
Yeah.
me. I really wanted to be able to support my practice with my own research, and so I actually was spurred on to pursue a PhD. And actually, I didn't get into the PhD program I wanted to at Penn. They actually cut the deck according to GRE scores, and I wasn't a good standardized test taker. But thankfully, our lives were moving to San Francisco, and so UCSF was in my backyard. And honestly, that was the best possible choice I could have ever had,
Yeah.
considering its a research pedigree. And I found an incredible mentor, Abby Alcon, who was also a pediatric nurse practitioner and also studying early childhood stress. And yeah, I got my PhD in 3 years, thanks to her and my committee, and graduated that PhD wanting to put out a early childhood stress diagnostic tool into the world. We know so much about early childhood stress that people, the lay folk, do not. And for some reason, we're gatekeeping it, maybe because we feel like we're too early or too unsure. But I'm on the side of, let's get it out there. Let's test it, continue implementing protocols that could possibly change the course of future generations' health. So
Right.
I went to biotech and Googles and Apples of the world and said, see what you're doing here and see what you're doing with metric and genomic testing. Like, we can actually do a lot more here. And it kind of felt like it fell on deaf ears.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I guess I just will go build this myself.
Right.
And fortunately, serendipitously found my co-founder. She was actually sitting in the back of a Chinese restaurant at a
Oh,
mutual
wow.
birthday party. Yep. And we were in downtown San Francisco. And that night we sat down next to each other and started talking about, what we were into, what we do. And I think that's the beauty of San Francisco, honestly. The serendipity and the opportunity is just so ever present. And so we talked all night about what she was building with Oath Care and
Yeah.
dreaming, and what I had to say all about it with my personal experience. And we met up the next day, and we did not stop working together ever since. It was almost like this co-founder conversation came up, kind of just like, yeah, so you want to be my co-founder? I was like, yeah, obviously.
It was a
It wasn't like
given.
we were dating each other. It was just like we were throwing our lives together
Yeah.
at each other as much as possible. And it just made, so much sense to go and build this together. So to all those whiteboard founders out there that, are dreaming of becoming a founder and then, go on speed dating to find their co-founders, that is just the opposite way of how I would ever dream of building a company. But yeah, I think you should build a company when you can't live another day in this world without what you're building. And for us only to measure and track a child's height, weight, and head circumference when 80 to 85% of their neurobiology is formed before the age of 5, we are doing a massive disservice by only measuring and tracking a few metrics. And by the time you're 30 and 40 and are freaking Brian Johnson and measuring and tracking your whole body, you're too late. It's too
Right.
late.
Right.
And so I want to be able to implement these things earlier and sooner where the change can really have massive impact.
Right. Well, super interesting journey. First, starting from the beginning, there's a lot to break down here. Obviously, very, very unfortunate what happened with your brother there, but sometimes it's those heroes and the most dark moments that really can change the trajectory of your life, right? And
Exactly.
I think especially in tech, we don't give enough respect to nurses and the other heroes in other fields who truly make such a big difference in all of our lives. So very, very interesting to see how that set your trajectory later on and later in life. And of course, the different universities you've been through, the PhD. You've definitely done a lot of different things, but to transition into building your own startup, specifically because of your experiences in ACEs, which, to be honest, something I never heard about, but completely makes sense to me. I won't claim to be somebody who knows a lot about biology. I never did great on that or medicine, but one of the things I can definitely understand and I can sort of see if I just look around is, medical conditions and symptoms and these different things, they definitely accumulate over time. And there's certain events that can happen in earlier in life that not only affect you mentally, but those mental symptoms can also affect you physically in different ways as well. So the earlier on we can diagnose that, I think it makes a lot of sense to me that would change the lives of many people. But there's probably not as much stress on it because people don't necessarily recognize that connection, or they don't want to recognize that connection. So
Yeah.
very, very interesting. So
Yes. And kids honestly are on it treated like second class citizens in this country. And so if we actually just elevated children to the rightful place, I think we would see a lot more good happening. But we're on our way.
100%, 100%. And that leading up to the story of Oath Care, which, we can get into, very, very interesting how you make your co-founder. I for a long time, I've beaten the drum of, San Francisco's personally, just because of how much serendipity there is just being there and how many people, cool people you meet working very, very interesting things in the different ways and apply to even the work you're doing, or maybe just hopping in and working together eventually. So very, very cool. And, if we get into Oath Care, so Oath Care was a digital health platform leveraging AI for maternal and child health care, which of course, is directly related to ACEs. And so, you guys had this long chat, you decided to work together.
Mhm.
But, from that moment, that's like a lot of people think finding a co-founder and an idea is the hard part, which, it can be difficult, but, everything after just becomes harder and harder and harder. So you
Absolutely.
guys, you guys leave the restaurant, you decide to work together, or maybe a couple of weeks later, decide to work together. Walk me through what are the next steps? How did you guys go about launching it and really dipping your feet into this?
I was in a postdoc at the time and I was doing both basically, Oath and the postdoc. And
Wow.
I found myself just so drawn to my co-founder's curiosity and desire to change pediatrics. She basically was like, "We're going to be the one medical of pediatrics." And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Yes, that is what we are going to be." And so really started dreaming about like all of the services and goods and care that goes into raising, from fertility through age 5. And we really wanted to be that comprehensive, vertically integrated practice for every care need that family would have. And so we really started thinking about what would this look physically? What would this look like? Virtually. And so we based our model off of the centering pregnancy model. And this
Hmm.
model really delivers group care to folks who are on this kind of linear path, right? So having a baby once delivered is a linear path. So babies are seen in the pediatric office every couple of months the first year, actually 9 times in the first year of life, sometimes more, often more, right? That's just for well visits. And so what we decided to do was group our services according to that time frame. So according to birth month, these parents would be able to get care delivered to them. Um, and from a wide variety of specialists. So, not just a pediatrician, but a pediatric nurse, a mental health therapist, a lactation consultant, sleep consultant. These are the folks you really need in those first couple of months of life. And they were all there at these parents' fingertips to ask any and all questions. And what was so great about this was that this was the first many to many model of care that we delivered virtually, so that many parents were benefiting from the advice of many clinicians. And many clinicians were also benefiting from the other clinicians' advice and even the other parents' feedback of that advice. And so
Right.
there was this beautiful sort of like non-ordered, non-hierarchical nature of delivering care, right? That like everyone's advice was welcome and needed. And all of this was to decrease the stress of parents and children, because we know the dyadic relationship between stress is felt between parent and child. And so by delivering care holistically to the parent, we were decreasing the stress of the child as well. We saw this in our postpartum depression scores, in our overall care and wellness scores, decreased ER visits amongst parents as well. Yeah, it was a really, really cool model of care.
Right. No, I mean, so I mean, I don't have kids myself, not yet at least, but I do have two little nephews, and I've only seen a fraction of this, and I'm not an expert by any means, or I don't claim to be. I'm very much basic, but based on everything I've seen, it is absolutely crazy to me just looking from the outside how much goes into not only before you have the child, but the first 1 or 2 years of the child, the amount of care, the amount of different aspects that come in. And even for parents, I think one of the most difficult things is just everybody has different advice on how to raise a kid or what things are good, what things are bad. And there's definitely industries that are preying on that as well. So to have reliable doctors or to have people you can come to and really get the actual facts of how to approach raising a child, or the different from a medical perspective, at least what to take into consideration, I think is massive.
Yeah.
And so I definitely see a lot of benefit there
We also
with
did
the work
this
you did.
during a time where there was a lot of misinformation spread, right? It was like kind of peak COVID. People were also looking for care outside of the normal institution. So we were the ones like delivering care digitally through
Right.
WhatsApp and Zoom for like, some of the earliest movers in this. We were also the ones that were delivering care using AI. So we were the first parent GPT, if you will, and built that so that parents could go ask the question first to a finely tuned GPT model. And then that question would be condensed such that it would be shared with the rest of the parents, so that they could benefit from that question and answer as well. And then other clinicians could kind of fine tune it and tweak it according to the parent's specific ask. And so it was really seeing how AI with the human in the loop was powered at such significant a significant way. But yeah, you're right. It was just it. I think it also comes down to communication. The
Yeah.
communication between um, care providers and parents was such a warm, safe, inviting way of communicating. We actually created algorithms and protocols for our folks, both parents and care providers, so that the conversation can be constructive and positive, despite any known differences.
And I assume like in this case, right, because the platform's two sided, you have the clinicians and you have people to reach out to. I assume one of the biggest things that probably came to help you there was those existing relationships that you had throughout your time, of course, across the country, but in different institutions and doing different things. And so because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, one of the most difficult things is how do you go from 0 to 1, right?
Mhm.
And how do you leverage those existing relationships? So like for you, like how, I guess where was that interplay when you're building this platform and you're training the AI and you're reaching out to customers, but like how do you get clinicians on board, and then how do you actually grow the platform?
Yeah, that was where we tripped up. So we had a very lovable product, but we did
Mhm.
not have a product that could scale.
Mm.
Or we did have a product that could scale. There's a few takes on this. I've heard everything from you were, 5 years too early for your time. And so people weren't really catching on to what we were building or finding a really, logical next step for it. Um, we have also heard that our go to market strategy was a bit too narrow. So, our go to market was direct to consumer, and that
Right.
was really working for us in like the 2019 to 2022 range, but really started to decline in 2023 and 2024 when our go to market should have really been more broadly kind of broadly reaching, right? So
Mhm.
having many different markets be tested and then really double click on the one that works. But we stayed pretty narrow to direct to consumer, which I think was also part of the downfall. Um, yeah, I think you're making these decisions every moment of every day, and they all feel like very existential. I think we also didn't realize that we were building a brand. And that brand was a brand that I think has laid the foundation for many other pediatric and maternal child health companies to come because we would be talking to investors, mostly white male, that they would just have no idea that this was a problem or, oh, let me
Right.
go talk to my wife about this. Would you ever do that with any other company? I don't think so.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think they were so out of touch with the problem. They were not thinking that. They didn't have any comps for this. And so it was a really hard thing to get over the line. But thankfully, I think we were one of them that could really help understand and shape where we were going. I think even still, we raised some of the most capital of all of the seed staged health companies. And they I don't think it was enough money. I think we needed to raise twice that amount.
Right.
So I think we needed 20 million instead of, 9 and some change to really get our idea off the ground and developed in a way that could really be scaled. But there's hope. I think, we really laid a foundation. I think we broke a lot of barriers. And we'll see what comes of it. It's definitely shaped my path in a bunch of different ways moving forward. But I can definitely see talking with the founders of now how it shaped them.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think yeah, there's been a lot of I think there's been a lot of work at least to try especially for as these, as more of these startups pop up, at least for VCs to be more uh understand this field more, at least bring people in or partners in who have more experience in this. But of course, there can be a lot more done. But yeah, it's really sick. It's really awesome to see how you guys, broke down those barriers, and you took the leap, and you're able to make this. And no matter what happens, even with what happened with Oath Care, there's so much stuff that you learn that we never necessarily see. As when you transition, you're like, oh, but I started not knowing anything about startups or entrepreneurship, and now I'm leaving at this point, even if the end point result isn't necessarily what you were hoping for. Which I think actually is a great transition into your current role at Felt, and we can talk about that, right? So what you're working on right now. So Felt is described as the ultimate care API, which is extremely intriguing. But to make sure I don't, put my interpretation on what that means, I would love to get, your interpretation, or what Felt means to you guys as the ultimate care API. So what does that mean for our audience to understand?
Yeah, sure. So simply, we are software that plugs into health and wellness apps, even content websites and apps to deliver care services seamlessly. So we deliver them faster and easier than Other care platforms can. We white label our services so it looks like one continuous service within the app that's already tracking your metrics around your heart health or your sugar health or your sleeping, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, all of that temperature for kids, especially to be able to close the loop on those metrics and have care be delivered massively reduces your anxiety and your misinformation or disinformation, quite honestly, from these health metrics that you're tracking.
Right.
So, this was a learning definitely from Oath and definitely from the co-founders' previous companies that they have launched. Um, and and it's just so obvious that this is what the market needs, given the trajectory of all the information that we're collecting, especially as a scientist. It's like, to what end? We have an obligation to actually provide care, treatment, intervention for all of these diagnostics that we're collecting. To
Yeah.
not have a sort of end point feels unethical, quite honestly. And
Hmm.
so it felt like a need. Not necessarily a want, quite honestly. And so, yeah, very, very happy to be pursuing this and pursuing this after Oath, given all the lessons learned. This is actually how the co founder, McKay, and I met. We met because I posted on LinkedIn at length a bunch of hard earned lessons learned from Oath. And
Right.
it was a way for me to connect with McKay because he was like, oh, this girl like knows what she's talking about. She's, got the scars of a founder. And yeah, he was wise, I think, to reach out and want to learn more. And from there we realized, how incredible matched our worldviews were. And the learnings from our previous companies have really matched to what we're building today.
Right. Yeah. No, I know like the amount of data being collected is just going more and more higher. Not only like, I think at this point people are quite used to the metrics collected by your Apple Watch with, like blood oxygen if you want to go more advanced, but of course, like steps, heart rate, all this type of stuff. But I know there's like new monitoring systems that just got approved, for example, like Stello, which is for your glucose monitoring. So it's just more and more metrics that we're getting on an individual, but connecting those metrics and actually making diagnoses based on it isn't something that we necessarily have. It's just for the sake of collecting at this point, or just to make sure you're on a certain range. It's very, very basic. Um, like with Stello, for example, will tell you, okay, your glucose is at this level. You should probably, slow down or not, not eat as much sweet. But like that's a very, very basic diagnosis that's
General.
just telling you that's in this range. It's not actually giving you the much more insight, even though we have stuff like your heart rate and all these, other factors that could actually make a proper diagnosis here.
Exactly. And it takes in no regard your personal history or background or, how these metrics might really have to do with your individualized health. And so even though a care provider isn't the end all be all, I think it's a great next step in getting that specific care. And, to some care provider services, there's just one type of provider, right? Maybe it's just a doctor. To us, that is not the case. I have always believed that care is from a multidisciplinary team. And so you can have access through Felt to a mental health specialist, to a sleep consultant, to a doctor, to a pediatrician. So you can have different types of folks speak into your metrics depending on which ones you're tracking and why.
Right, 100%. And I guess that's the differentiation for you guys between, Felt's approach and traditional telemedicine models where you guys are white labeled. So you guys are acting in the background, but, you're not necessarily you're not necessarily limiting on the front end. Is that correct?
That's right. And that's what's such a barrier to folks, even like to health plans that acquire these point solutions, that you still have to go through many hoops to get care. We literally, from that metric reading, you can say, get care now, and immediately deploys a care provider to you.
Hmm. Well, super, super interesting. And I know, of course, Felt, I'm sure, is poised for great growth going forward. And, growth is one of those topics we talk about all the different, all the time on this podcast because it's such a difficult part. I think, people always talk about getting to product market fit. And of course, on the early stage, that is the most important thing to do, but everything after is not trivial either. And of course, as somebody who's the chief revenue officer of Felt, I am sure growth is one of the main priorities on your mind. So when you think about growth and your approach to it, like what are some insights there, and how do you think about growing the company and going forward?
I think of two things come to mind. It's multimodal and it's highly relationship based. These are two things that have very much served me in my approach. Um, I never took a business class in my entire life, but I am a highly relational person. And I think through company building and honestly, even like beyond that, I am just wanting to connect with the individual based on their needs and wants, and I want to serve them. And this goes deeper than just through my work. It's like through my life,
Right.
is what I ultimately want to do. And so I think that comes off as authentic. And I think that isn't something like I'm trying to sell them anything. I'm really just genuinely trying to help them. And if it's not in their path or in their set of needs at this time, which it very much wasn't with Oath, when I was even going through M&A conversations with Oath, it was very much around, this is what we have to offer. This is what we have built. And these are all of the ways in which it could be used. And what was the resounding feedback was that this was just such a capital intensive, operationally risky pursuit. And so that learning, even though we weren't able to be acquired at the time, I was able to really sit with that feedback and use it towards what we're building with Felt. So, maintaining those relationships and actually really applying those learnings have made me way better at sales and partnerships. I think the other thing would be this multimodal approach where um, because I don't think like a traditional sales person, I think of all of the other ways outside of the box in which sales can come. So that might mean I am partnering with them more on like the marketing side. So I'm doing more for them around how can I promote your business? How can I speak more about what you're doing? I love what you're doing. So how can I also support like your base with the way that I deliver care? Like I'm even providing my own insights, my
Right.
own advice around my clinical and research work that actually lends to their company, the way that they've thought about their company or perspective on their company. So I really engage with them not just on like my product, their product, but even their product alone and how it can be better and how I can really lend more than just the sales part.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think relationships in business is everything.
It really
So,
is. Yeah.
it actually reminds me, funny enough, completely different field, but it actually reminds me a little bit about what Costco does, in some ways, because one of the things that they offer to their partners, especially longstanding ones, is they'll actually go in and find inefficiencies in your process to make the price cheaper for Costco members, but then also better for the business.
This is
Um,
actually a great point. Being hyper pessimistic about yourself and your company is very truth telling, I think, to someone. I think sales can come off as like hyper positive and like a bit unrealistic. And what I have found is almost being self deprecating to a fault. Because I know the company better than anyone. And so I can really say, like, where, things may be loose ends or, problematic for this individual company and be very blunt and clear that, like, these are the things we'll be working on together as we, build this together. I think
yeah.
coming off too polished or too optimistic can definitely put up more red flags to folks than otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really interesting because you know you sort of alluded to it, but your background isn't necessarily in traditional sales or business.
Yeah.
But I'm sure actually that brings a new element to the table, which is because of your non-traditional background there. You know, there's all these different strategies that other people might have not seen in the market, and I think that can be very very interesting. So very cool, and you know I think what's really also interesting with your background is typically when I talk to people who are in biotech or you know at the intersection of healthcare and technology, they usually start on the technology side first and then make their way into healthcare because they realize there's a lot of problems. But in this case, you actually started on the healthcare side first and then made your way into the technology, which was super super interesting. And so you know talking about that, you know, given your research background in child stress and the autonomic nervous system reactivity, you know, where do you see technology playing a role in monitoring and managing stress in healthcare settings?
Oh, it's everything.
Yeah.
And I think if we uh, can really focus on this, we can create this incredible stress diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
I think a bunch of people are working on this. I think Aura Ring, Eat Sleep, um, you know, other biotech companies that are actually building the equipment to monitor these biometrics of autonomic nervous system reactivity, telomere length, epigenetic methylation, hair and saliva cortisol. There's just a whole wide array of biometrics that really together can give an incredible picture of where a person's individual stress response is. That's why it's so hard stress is so elusive because it's so hard to quantify, and we
Right.
need both qualitative and quantitative information to be able to have a reasonable assessment. And then just I think the interventions are even beyond the assessment at this time. So I think we have incredible interventions. We just don't know when and how to use them. It's like,
Mm,
at what point is it critical that we get this intervention in the child? And I think the earlier we can assess the child, the better we can have the intervention work. And so the interventions kind of have their hands tied behind their back because they don't have the assessment tools to really give them the appropriate benefit to all that they are. So I'm very hopeful with technology in around assessing stress, and honestly, really improving our health outcomes. I think the problem is we have to start building health technology outside of the venture capital model. And I know that this is
mm,
super unpopular, but I really believe that this is something we need to do. Unless you're a general catalyst in building your own health system to test, you know, a wide variety of different technologies and healthcare models, I think, yeah, outside of that, venture capital is just not aligned with building health technology. It's because the incentives are not aligned, right? Like health technology needs health outcomes to be the thing, whereas VC needs growth, engagement, retention, all of these metrics that are good for building business, but bad
yeah.
for building better health outcomes. And so we even saw this where we were not as incentivized to monitor and track health outcomes early on in our product. We were more incentivized to build the business. And that actually may be fine, but I think it's very hard once you start building a company for metrics and growth. I think it's really hard to kind of unwind and
Yeah.
then start saying, okay, now we're going to look at health outcomes. It's like basically coming out of your R&D money, I guess, at that point, which is, um, yeah, just a side project or hustle.
Right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think more and more actually there's not only in healthcare, but there's a lot of fields like that where people are starting to realize that the typical, oh, you go, you know, you have an idea, you go raise VC money, might not necessarily be the best idea for what you're trying to do. Don't get me wrong though, there's a lot of benefits to it, but you know, I totally understand that.
Yeah,
And I
as
think
much as you can bootstrap, bootstrap. I mean, this is what Felt did, and I am so proud of them for bootstrapping as long as they did.
mhm,
I think it put them in a much better position to fundraise. So we did still take VC funding, but
yeah.
it was because of their nature of being bootstrapped for 18 months and really proving out a lot of incredible things, having incredible partners out the gate that created such an advantage of when they fundraised. I think the other thing I would say, it's not just like don't VC raise, it's be cautious when you VC raise,
Yeah.
who you VC raise from. And also maybe there's other sort of VC-esque models like the family office model or the private equity model that may be more into the mission oriented nature of what you're building, the philanthropic oriented nature of what you're building, which
Yeah.
would cause more dollars to be flowed into. So those are sort of the things I would think about.
Yeah, especially as more people get into angel investing too, right? I
Yeah.
know that's a huge push right now in Silicon Valley, where a lot of traditional VCs are struggling in some ways because there's a lot of money available in other methods, like family office, like you mentioned, or in Silicon Valley with everybody in big tech making good money off their stocks, using that to angel invest in startups that they really believe in. So I think more and more non-traditional paths are going to open up, which doesn't necessarily have to disrupt your typical VC startup, but just gives more other companies a better chance at really being able to prove out what they want to build. Um, I think what's really interesting there is we talked about technology and its role. I think this generation in particular, and the younger generations actually after me, because I still grew up with the childhood halfway not fully involved in technology, or at least traditional smartphones. But it's funny because a lot of these symptoms, a lot of the benefits of technology are obviously out there, but a lot of the symptoms, like stress, for example, can be alleviated with the introduction of technology. So the way people are going about it today is either you get rid of technology, which isn't very feasible in today's world, or I think I tend to agree with this approach, which is we have to use technology in order to really start getting into diagnosing things earlier. And I think that is a more sustainable path going forward,
Yeah.
linking to health outcomes. So very, very interesting, and we'll see what happens. But I think overall, my experiences as someone who does not have a PhD, has only done bio till like grade 12, but still has somewhat of an outsider's interest in it. I think your thoughts on stress especially is super intriguing, and I think it's something all of us can relate to in some degrees. Where when you're stressed, other functions of our body tend to break down to some to some level compared to our normal self. And so I think really getting into the nitty gritty of that and trying to quantify it can do a lot of really good things for almost everyone in the world, because no one is immune from stress. And so regardless of wherever you are, I think for further information and just being able to deal with it better is such a big benefit.
Yes.
But super, super interesting. And I actually wanted to shift gears a little bit into some of your work with your not-for-profit, Act 17 Collective, because that's something we actually also do not have usually in this podcast, where someone's also working with not-for-profit. So you're the co-founder and executive director of Act 17, a nonprofit that's bridging faith and technology. So super interested to understand what inspires you to start this organization. I just give a very high level overview, but some of your missions and the way you're going about that.
Sure. Well, I live in San Francisco and I've lived here for over 10 years now. And what's very true is that there are more dogs than kids, and there are uh, 7.5 people that go to church every Sunday per church.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the most unchurched city in America. And I think that this is drastically leading to the decline of our health and mental health, especially. Losing the sense of community, being more isolated and disconnected more than ever. Um, I think that tech is hyper Christian. I think there is no other industry that is more abundant mindset, more forgiveness first, um, more anti scarcity, sort of like um, future thinking, co creative than technology. And this is very Christian to be in that sort of mindset. And so, yeah, I think it's really about having folks be changed. The kings and queens of culture, if you will, I think tech and entertainment especially define culture. We want to redefine their success by redefining what it means to be successful. So instead of building for money, fame, and power, we're wanting them to build for the eternal,
Mm.
for the collective. And so, with that, we are hosting events and small groups to be able to have folks that are known for their success in the world, but also are Christian, talk about their relationship with Jesus and why that matters in what they're building. Um, and to be able to do it in a way that is warm and welcoming and safe, to do it in a highly intellectualized manner. I think Christianity gets a bad rap being very simple-minded and for those that can't really think deeply on things, but just as much as it can be simple, it can be highly complex and intellectual. And so we're trying to reach folks that want to converse at that highly intellectual level. Yeah, and this was really based on my experience of living in San Francisco and being with so many highly curious, smart people that
Mm.
wanted to know why I believed what I believed and why. And I really didn't have a good answer for them. A good answer meaning like one that wasn't just like Jesus loves you and died for you, and yeah, it's just that is true. But how can I also say it in a way that can really reach their heart and their mind? What I have learned from just the various conversations that have come my way through long walks is that people have this emptiness, and then they describe it as like this hole around their heart that they just cannot fill. They have done things like quantify all the metrics in their body, and then they started meditating for sleep, and then they started getting an executive coach or joining YPO, and then they started low dosing on mushrooms, and then they maybe went on a week-long silent meditation retreat, and then
Yeah.
they started doing a god dose of LSD or MDMA, or ayahuasca to ego death essentially. And what they're still left with is just this hole that can't be filled. And we believe that that hole is meant to be filled by God, by Jesus. And so, yeah, by giving these sort of environments where people can come and connect in a safe, warm environment, hear the message of Jesus through someone who is of this world, highly successful, but also building in this mindset, I think can really start to, and we've seen it, change the hearts and minds of folks around why they're doing what they're doing. And all we're meant to do with this is just create a next step, a path in which maybe they can take a next step on their journey. The goal is not conversion. The goal is not to proselytize. It's
Yeah.
to connect with folks and help them take their next step.
No, 100%. I think one of the things I love a lot about San Francisco is just the willingness of people to explore different ideas. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people who, a lot of people have a very similar mindset, I feel like, who like to question a lot of different things, question the world and question how things are. So, having people who are in the same mindset and who have been there and done that, and sort of their conclusions and observations and conclusions, just being able to go off of that, I think that's such a big thing. And so whether or not you decide to ultimately embrace Christianity in this case or not, the very fact that you can go in there and just be with people who have gone through similar experiences, and essentially how it got them to the end outcome, I think is very interesting. And something I feel like we have for other paths in San Francisco, like you mentioned, through drug usage or whatever else, but not as much more traditional paths, like like going more back into religion and looking more into that as well. So very, very interesting, and a little bit different than other people in tech, for sure. So I hope that you guys keep working on it, and more people can come and learn a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Michelle. I have two last questions before I let you go. The first one is, what is a book that you recommend us reading?
It was one that I just finished actually last night in the middle of the night. It was so good I couldn't put it down, but it's A Court of Thorns and Roses. So my very good friend has got me into fairy fantasy. So
Mm.
if you're really wanting to try something new, um, yeah, I highly recommend that book.
Awesome. Well, you know what? Typically I get nonfiction recommendations here, but I've realized that fiction can actually do a lot, and not just sci-fi. I think a lot of people in tech are like, yes, sci-fi inspires certain innovations. No doubt it
Right.
does. But even just thinking in realms and different areas that isn't necessarily here today, like just in more outlandish ways, I guess you could say, or ways that we don't necessarily think about. That thinking can, I think, translate into our thinking as startup founders and here as well. So super
Totally.
interesting. I'll take a look at that book. And then the last question I have for you is just, what's next for you, for Felt and Act 17 going forward? What can we look forward to?
Oh, growth. Um, I'm excited to work for a company in healthcare that's making money and that actually has an incredible, as Oath did, extension of non-toxic work environment. Just an incredible team to co-build and lead this with. Yeah, and with Act 17, it's growth. It's being able to go to more places. We're going to Dubai and
Oh,
Abu
wow.
Dhabi
Yeah,
in a month, less than a month. And yeah, just really seeing where that goes, where God leads us with that. And yeah, for me personally, it's really about connecting more with my family and being more grounded and present with my family. And thankfully, these things my work allows me to do that. And I have really stood for that more and more. But it's always a challenge when there's always so much incredible opportunity out there. I think reminding myself that the greatest opportunity is to be present with my family. Yeah, is just the greatest gift.
for sure. Well, that's a good note to end off on. So thank you so much, Michelle, for coming onto the podcast. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.